Some decisions don't announce themselves as historic, but quietly reshape everything that follows. This PGA Tour vote is one of them. Days before the board is expected to approve the most significant structural reform in modern golf, Rory McIlroy stepped forward with a warning that leadership cannot easily dismiss, not at another player, at the tour's own proposal. When someone of Rory's standing speaks this close to a vote, it doesn't signal routine disagreement. It signals that something inside this plan is genuinely wrong. The proposal could redefine tournament status, reshape player pathways, and permanently shift how professional golf operates for the next generation. Supporters call it evolution. Critics call it a gamble with consequences nobody has fully mapped out yet. So I want your take before we get into this. Is this necessary reform, or is the PGA Tour creating instability at the worst possible moment? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want coverage of everything that happens after this vote, subscribe now, because here is what Rory actually said and why it landed so differently from anything else in golf right now. Ahead of the U.S. Open, McIlroy sat down with reporters expecting routine questions. His preparation, his form, his mindset. Instead, the conversation turned to the tour's proposed restructuring. And what came out was not diplomatic, not carefully worded, not political. It was blunt. Rory said the PGA Tour's old system, the one everyone spent years criticizing, may have been better than anyone realized. And then he looked directly at the two-track model sitting at the center of this vote and called Track 2 a glorified Corn Ferry event. That single sentence changed the entire conversation, because this is not a fringe voice looking for attention. This is the man who publicly defended the PGA Tour when major stars were signing LIV contracts, the man who had more credibility inside that institution than almost anyone else, and he is now saying the tour's own solution may be worse than the problem it was designed to fix. So what exactly is being voted on, and why is the timing so critical? Brian Rolapp is expected to deliver one of the most consequential announcements in modern golf within days. The Future Competition Committee has been working behind closed doors for months, and now that work is moving toward a formal policy board vote expected before the Travelers Championship. Once that vote passes, the structure gets set. Tournament classifications get assigned, player pathways get locked in, and the window to course correct closes permanently. But here is what makes this moment genuinely uncomfortable. The details still aren't fully public. How qualification between tracks works, how many players move up or down, how often, none of that has been clearly explained to the people most affected by it. Leadership is asking professional golf to approve a framework that still carries enormous unanswered questions at its center, and that is not a small problem before a vote of this magnitude. And that danger lives inside the very foundation of what is being voted on. The two-track model sounds logical on paper. Track 1 becomes the premier lane. The biggest stars, the largest prize funds, the most prestigious events, roughly 12 to 16 elite PGA Tour events alongside the 4 majors, the Players' Championship, and FedEx Cup playoffs. The top of professional golf, consolidated and protected. Track 2 operates beneath it, a secondary pathway where players compete for the chance to move up. Promotion and relegation, borrowed from European football and packaged as progress. The PGA Tour believes this creates clarity, stronger competition at the top, a defined ladder for every player to climb. But Rory sees that the proposal isn't advertising. The moment you label something secondary, people treat it as secondary. Sponsors don't write big checks for second-tier events. Broadcasters don't compete for secondary programming rights. And the sport's biggest stars don't rearrange their schedules for tournaments carrying a lesser label. What leadership is calling motivation, Rory is calling a perception trap that quietly poisons everything beneath Track 1. The RBC Canadian Open, one of the oldest national championships in professional golf, an event with generations of history, decades of prestige, and a permanent place in the sport's identity. Under this proposed structure, It could be classified as a Track 2 event. Not because its history is in question, not because it failed to deliver, simply because of where it lands when leadership starts drawing lines between Premier and everything beneath it. And Rory's concern is straightforward. The moment that label gets attached, the slow erosion begins. Sponsors start questioning their investment. Broadcasters reassess their commitment. Top-ranked players begin prioritizing elsewhere. Nobody leaves overnight, but the identity of that tournament shifts quietly and permanently. Prestige doesn't collapse, it fades, and once it fades far enough, it almost never comes back. The Canadian Open is simply the clearest example of a problem that affects multiple historic tournaments across professional golf. So here is what I want to know. Which tournament would you hate to see lose its status under this new structure? Drop the name in the comments right now, and if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button, because what comes next explains why this entire restructuring may have been built on a foundation that no longer exists. Guaranteed contracts, enormous prize funds, untouchable names disappearing without warning. Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, and the PGA Tour suddenly fighting for its identity against a competitor it never prepared for. The response was aggressive and immediate. Bigger purses, signature events, smaller fields, every decision is justified by a genuine emergency, and those decisions made sense at the time. But here is Rory's core argument. The emergency has changed. LIV Golf's momentum has slowed. The pipeline of stars crossing over has dried up. The existential threat that forced every structural decision over the last 3 years looks fundamentally different today. Yet the PGA Tour is still building its entire future around that original emergency. And if the foundation of this restructuring was built on a threat that has since weakened, everything built on top of it deserves serious scrutiny before this vote makes it permanent. Jack Nicklaus has watched professional golf evolve through every era imaginable. 18 major championships, decades of witnessing the sport navigate pressure, politics, and transformation. If anyone understands the difference between necessary change and damaging change, it is him, and right now, he is uncomfortable. His specific concern centers on scheduling. The proposed structure risks clustering too many significant events into concentrated calendar windows. When major tournaments compete for attention inside the same narrow period, viewership splits, player fatigue builds, and each event loses the individual identity that made it valuable in the first place. That is not an administrative detail. That is a structural flaw with consequences that compound quietly over years. Rory speaking from the player perspective, Nicklaus from the historical perspective, sponsors watching silently, players waiting for clarity that has not arrived. This is no longer one opinion. It is a pattern. If the vote passes, the two-track structure becomes permanent. Tournament classifications get assigned, historic events absorb their new labels quietly, and the warnings from Rory and Nicklaus get filed away as minority opinions that leadership chose to move past. If the vote stalls, the chaos moves inward. Months of committee work collapses. Player confidence in leadership erodes. And LIV Golf, which has been watching this very carefully, finds breathing room it did not have last week. There is no clean outcome, only the question of which consequences professional golf is more prepared to live with. Rory saw this moment coming before anyone else did. So did Nicklaus. The question isn't whether the PGA Tour can change, it's whether it can change without damaging the very tournaments and traditions that made it powerful in the first place. So before that announcement drops, tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I genuinely want to see where the golf community is tuned in from today. If this breakdown helped you understand what is actually at stake, subscribe and hit the bell right now.